The Pontiac V8 engine, produced from 1955 to 1981 in displacements varying from 265 cubic inches to 455 cubic inches, the Pontiac V8 has a unique place in automotive history. It powered so many iconic Pontiac as well as General Motors cars in various forms. Perhaps the most typical Pontiac V8s that one might recall are the 389 cubic inch V8 that came out in the 1959 model year, the Pontiac 400, which was introduced in 1967 as an enlarged 389, the 421, which powered many different Pontiacs and even came with dual quad versions in some of these big ponchos, and the 455, which was introduced in 1970. Some of us would even remember the Pontiac Turbo 301 of the early 1980s that could be found under hood in a number of Firebirds. Of course, Pontiac made many more displacements than that, and one might forget about even the little 265 cubic inch V8 that was a Malaise-era smog motor powering some Pontiacs, and in fact was optional equipment on some of them in the early 1980s. But we'll talk about that Malaise-era engine a different time. One other Pontiac V8 that's somewhat forgotten is the 326 cubic inch V8 that was offered in intermediate-sized Pontiacs for a number of years. Now, Pontiac's Tempest was introduced in 1961 and had two different engines available. A 195 cubic inch trophy four-cylinder that was effectively half of a 389 cubic inch V8, and you could get this in various forms with various carburations, or at the time an optional 215 cubic inch aluminum block engine that was also offered in the Oldsmobile F85 and Cutlass, as well as the Buick Skylark. While that little 215 cubic inch engine would go on to become one of the most successful engines in automotive history once it was sold to Rover a few years later and became the Rover V8, Pontiac decided for 1963 it needed a different optional engine under hood, presumably because the 215 cubic inch V8 just cost a little bit much. And it was for this reason that Buick in 1962 introduced its Fireball V6, which would later spawn the legendary Buick 3.8 or 3800 engine. But for 1963 in the Pontiac Tempest, Pontiac decided to put what they called a 326 cubic inch V8 under hood. And the 326 cubic inch V8 would be a Pontiac. You could, at the time in 1963, get a 389 cubic inch V8 in a lot of the full-size Pontiacs, but General Motors had an edict at the time that the mid-size cars or anything below a full-size car couldn't have an engine that was larger than 330 cubic inches. So it would seem that this 326 cubic inch engine would fit the bill and kind of push right up against that limit. Well, not quite. And for 1963 and 1963 alone, at least in Pontiac V8s, the 326 really wasn't a 326. It was, in fact, a 336 cubic inch engine masquerading as a 326 engine under hood in these Tempests. And it did that for just 1 year only in the Pontiac lineup. The story begins with actually Pontiac's sister division, GMC. GMC in the late 1950s was actually employing Pontiac V8s under their hood and offered those to customers. Take a look here at this GMC 336 cubic inch V8 under hood in a 1959 GMC pickup. Does it look familiar? You can see that kind of central thermostat with the coolant hose coming up out of it, as well as the valve covers and the overall look of the engine. It is indeed pure Pontiac, despite the fact that it reads GMC on it. Well, this engine had been produced by Pontiac for GMC, as I mentioned, since the 1959 model year. And when Pontiac was looking for a little V8 to put under hood of their Tempest that was going to cost them less than the aluminum block 215 cubic inch engine, someone at Pontiac must have thought, oh heck, there's already a 336 cubic inch V8, which by that point was effectively a 389 cubic inch engine with a smaller bore. In fact, it was a 389 cubic inch engine with a 3.78 inch bore as opposed to a 4.06 inch bore. and both engines shared the same 3 3/4 inch stroke. By the way, there are actually two Pontiac V8s under the hoods of GMCs that are 336 cubic inches, and they are actually different. One was based on Pontiac's 370 cubic inch V8. The other was based on Pontiac's 389 cubic inch V8, and both under hood in the GMCs displaced 336 cubic inches. But we'll save that story for another day. In any case, someone, as I mentioned, at Pontiac must have thought, well, let's just take this 336 cubic inch V8 we're already making for a GMC, label it a 326, dump it under hood in the Tempest, and well, who's really going to know the difference? It's only 10 cubic inches, and well, if it ever came out in the public, nobody's going to complain that we gave a customer 10 extra cubic inches effectively for free. We were under advertising the engine size. Well, that seemed like a great plan, but apparently, as the story goes, after 1 year, GM's top brass understood that Pontiac was actually putting a 336 under hood in these intermediate-sized cars and forced Pontiac to get under the corporate limit of 330 cubic inches. So for 1963 and 1963 only, the so-called Pontiac 326 cubic inch engine, really a 336 cubic inch engine, had a 3.78 inch bore and a 3.75 inch stroke. For 1964 through to the end of the 326 cubic inch engine's run in 1967, the bore was further reduced from the 3.78 inches to 3.72 inches to make it a true 326 cubic inch engine. In 1968, of course, Pontiac would replace the 326 with a 350, and that ban that GM had on those sized engines in intermediate-sized cars obviously went away. And that kind of went away with the muscle car era and even the GTO that clearly went against that in 1964 by putting a 389 cubic inch V8 under hood in what was effectively a Pontiac Tempest. So in any event, for 1 year and 1 year only, if you ordered that Pontiac so-called 326 engine in 1963, you really got a 336 cubic inch mill under hood. And from 64 to 67, you got a true 326 cubic inch V8 under hood. And just like the other Pontiac V8s from 326 cubic inches to 455 cubic inches, all the Pontiac V8s, including the 326 and 336, are the same external size physically. There's no difference that you can really discern. You have to look at the engine codes and the application that the engine is in order to discern what size engine it is, unlike other divisions that had small blocks as well as big blocks. Although I will say that the Pontiac 265 and 301 have shorter deck heights and the engines are physically smaller than the 326 to 455 engines. Nonetheless, Pontiac V8s are some of the best V8s in automotive history. And the 326, whether you got the larger 326, we'll call it, that really measured 336 cubic inches, or the smaller one, really were gems of engines in those little Tempests. Those Tempests were light cars, and the 326, no matter what version you had, 2-barrel, 4-barrel, low compression, high compression, really pushed those cars along with a good deal of scoot. In fact, the Pontiac 389, the standard one that was employed in the Catalinas, just a 389 2-barrel, is just an absolutely excellent and amazingly refined and powerful engine that you really don't desire any more power once you drive one. And the 326 is about the same. The only real issues that these engines had are typically timing chains, which was something that was a challenge for all Pontiacs. I should say the timing chain and gears. They had a phenolic plastic gear that would shed a tooth, and then the timing chain would start slipping, and eventually the engine just wouldn't run. But that's an easy fix, and once you repair that with an all-metal set, the engines basically run forever. Some of them have, in later years, soft camshafts, and that can be a challenge. But by and large, the Pontiac V8s are very reliable, robust, smooth, and just all around great engines that belong in automotive history because they really were just so excellent. Hope you enjoyed this spotlight on Pontiac's 1 year only, at least in the Pontiac division, 336 or 326 cubic inch V8, depending on what you want to call it. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. Thanks again for watching.